and this is in politically, because of I'm a political animal right now. Um, please allow me to take a jab.
Okay.
But it could translate into what leaders say, that you have a big movement, you have a massive mammoth of people, and you enjoy popularity, but the structures that are required to shield you from whatever the system brings or organization is still owned by the elite few. So as massive as the elephant might be, the mosquito just, it's that thing it uses to sting you, and the skin cells of the elephant, regardless of its size, the elephant still has a thin skin. So you could be massive, but you'll still suffer from such a small creature. The political cliche is and this, I know I'm reaching, but an organized minority will always beat a disorganized majority. I'm reaching, but...
Interpretation is always right.
I said I'm biased.
If that's the way to get into it, okay, fine. Let's go. All right. So the as someone who previously and maybe still has often talked about the fact that ODM is a force to be reckoned with and remains a force to be reckoned with the conversations that are being had now, it's clear that ODM has made its stance that they must be on the table when it comes to power. And in the position of the deputy president or the running mate to William Ruto, for which ODM has already said, by virtue of it being in the broad-based arrangement, that William Ruto will come back for a second term, and that should this continue, the running mate must be an ODM member. Is that still the position?
I think because I've heard party officials speak about it, it probably is not emanating from street talk. So probably that's what the party anticipates, that we, in an election, in a pre-election pact, that our expectation would be we produce a deputy presidential candidate. However, I'm curious to understand how we will work this out, because the Orange Democratic Movement did not have a pre-election agreement prior to 2022, and therefore UDA had structures which it used to win the election that they employed, and they managed to secure a victory for themselves. However, after 2024, after the formation of the broad-based government, which was occasioned by the youth of the country, now in this, we're seeking to form a pre-election coalition. And I think it's fair, because the negotiations have just begun. It's fair that everybody lays their expectations. And we're saying this full well knowing that, and you've had the party say that if we do not agree, we are willing to go the election alone. But of course, that tune has changed over time. So the expectation, the anticipation of having a deputy presidential candidate I don't think is far-fetched or misplaced. It's the subject of a negotiation, which we can only wait to see how it will unfold.
I mean, behind that conversation as well has been fact that ODM looks at itself as having stabilized the ship that is the President Ruto's government through the broad-based arrangement. But that notwithstanding, the other conversation is we have numbers to then demand that we be given this position, because if you look at how things have been moving, perhaps especially in Mount Kenya region, that many are saying, political pundits are saying, that one is gone because seemingly the support is elsewhere. Now, ODM is coming forth and saying, you know what, we have the numbers, we deserve this, because if not, then who? Would that be among the reasons why then the party leadership is telling President William Ruto, we have the numbers to prove that this position is rightfully ours?
No, certainly. I think it's the political culture to make the tribal arithmetic. And I wager that 2027 will be no different. That, yes, there might be change agents that will show up in separate factions and movements, but the underlying, the soft underbelly will be the tribal arithmetic, at least for this election, because post 2027 is when I think the change of guard nationally is going to occur. So, in my honest opinion, I think it is backward to make that calculation. However, if we were to look at elections from the tribal prism, presidencies have been won without Mount Kenya, for example. Moi won his 92 election without, and 97 generally, without the support of Mount Kenya. Raila Odinga won 2007. It was a highly contested election, but without this enjoying the support of Mount Kenya. So the people who are analyzing elections from the tribal prism are waging into the president, saying that it is possible for you to still win your seat without a certain support from certain regions. But there's something I have to hand to the president, is that he has persisted to be the president of. He presents himself as a president of everybody. So he has not ceased to, for example, as previous presidents have done, where if I have a disagreement with a certain region, for example, Jomo Kenyatta, after his spat in Kisumu, after the launch of Jaramogi Oginga Odinga Hospital, which was known as Russia then, there was an incident. There was political differences between him and Jaramogi at the time, which led to the shooting of a couple of people. Yeah. He never went back to that region. And you saw, for example, Uhuru, prior to the handshake, he never stepped to that region. But President Ruto has presented himself even under very heavy criticism, even under public criticism and social unacceptability of sorts. He still has tried to court all regions. So while some of his advisors are telling him, go at it without Mount Kenya, he persists. He goes for a campaign there. He still says that I am with you, which I think is good. I think that's the one thing I'm really anticipating, that he should not cower or bow to a tribal negotiation. So anybody who fronts himself as a person who promises the votes just in terms of a tribal bloc, I think the president should just treat disdainfully. So, because this is the problem that Kenya continues to face, and if we go into that, if we descend into that isolation of Mount Kenya, I think we are going into a deep, dark place. So while I might have my own reservations, for example, with Kikuyu hegemony, I don't think that any person who's fit for the presidency should try to isolate a region. If there are candidates who think that they want to go at it alone, if there are leaders who think that, we have enough votes, I think it's a democratic country, but I like the approach that the president has taken, where he's on a charm offensive. He's out to court all the regions of the country.
Is it because of the numbers, or is it because he does feel that he would be a unifier as a president?
I think it's both. It's rarely that transparent in politics. It's not a game of sainthood. If public good comes as collateral, public good often in the political sphere happens as collateral of certain actions. So it could be out of self-preservation politically, but the collective good is that we then get to avoid the morass that was 2007, for example. But even if you think about it mathematically, the reason why it's being peddled is because it's a possibility. If you consolidate, for example, what was Raila Odinga's base, and you lose half of what you had, for example, in the previous election, you're still able to sail home and dry. And the people who are in the leadership, the echelons of leadership in ODM, are saying that we still control a significant portion of what, and the machinery, the mobilization and organizational machinery that Raila used in the previous election. And they're more than happy to deliver that to the president.
Even that's being said, it's clear that there are certain regions that, not for anything else, hold sway just by the nature of the fact that they are populous, right? With what we've seen just this past weekend with the Mulembe Nation. It's forever been a Mount Kenya story because it's extremely populous. Does UDA, together with ODM, still hold the charm of the mountain, especially with what we've seen over the last couple of weeks?
In all honesty, ODM particularly has nothing to lose in the mountain, because we have not enjoyed great support from the mountain previously.
Even with the broad-based agreement.
I mean, that's why I'm saying ODM, particularly as a faction, and this is some of the realities we'll have to confront as a nation. But typically, the vote has consistently been against Raila Odinga in the mountain, and that's why, for example, you will hear ODM. Certain leaders within the ODM faction say that no, we can go at it alone, because consistently we have tried to court the mountain. Our departed leaders severally tried to climb the mountain with little success. But the UDA faction greatly enjoyed such tremendous support from the mountain in 2022. So while some of it might have been lost, because it's not lost entirely, ODM now comes with its base and says that we have not lost anything, and therefore most of our bases are intact. On Mulembe Nation and what happened over the weekend, I think, I mean, if you mobilize a crowd, you're going to get a crowd. But ODM, again, we have very little parliamentary presence in Bungoma, in Trans Nzoia, even in Kandui.
Are you saying if you had members of parliament from those areas, then you would have more support?
No. We would be worried. I would be worried if ODM, for example, had a member of parliament where our former Secretary General came from, even an MCA or Trans Nzoia, that general area. Yeah. But the truth is we have no seats there. So you cannot say that ODM has lost support in a place where it did not have support in the first place. So that's why I'm unfazed. And if anything is to go by, the next day Didmus shows up and just gets a similar populous crowd, and he's running the show one man. So it's very easy to conflate these issues, but we generally do not enjoy parliamentary presence in that area.
But that notwithstanding, ODM has positioned itself within the 20 years as a party that would go across the country because it was a national party, you know. And you look at its presence, there's a reason why Raila Odinga fashioned himself as a descendant of the Wanga Kingdom. You know, he has bases deep inside the Western region. And with that, then ODM would come as a package, as a party that is fine. The strong base is in Luo Nyanza, but then again, the Mashemeji as well would come as a backup, and that would form the numbers that ODM would present before anyone in terms of negotiation. Add that together with Coast Region. But now, as we speak, then with the moves that we're seeing, one would say perhaps the Mulembe Nation, including the bases, talk about Kakamega, Vihiga, that ODM has enjoyed over time, would be slipping away. And that then makes it difficult for ODM to go to the negotiating table with the original backing of the Western region as a bloc, as had been. Is that a worry for ODM in terms of when they're asked, but what numbers do you come with for us to give you this position? And should the party then start thinking on how to get back perhaps the region?
Most definitely, I think it would be foolhardy to exist as a political party without trying to maintain your bases and try and gain ground where you have not in the past penetrated. But specifically, with regards to Mulembe Nation, in Bungoma, for example, we do not have a governor, we do not have a senator, we have no MP, we have no MCA, not even a women rep. In Trans Nzoia, we do not have the governor, we do not have a senator, we do not have the women rep. We only have one member of parliament, who is Caleb Amisi, and we have 2 members of county assemblies. That's the entirety of Trans Nzoia. In Kakamega now we have a governor, we do not have a senator, but we have the women rep as well, and we have 9 out of 12 members of parliament, and we have 27 elected MCAs and 15 nominated MCAs. So the reason why, for example, you would hear people speak about Oparanya is because in Kakamega, for example, we enjoy some good support. In Busia, for example, we enjoy a decent amount of support. So I do not think that we should let Mashemeji slip away. However, it is also important that that we focus on consolidating the ones that we have first. And I think that's what I've seen the party focus on. But most of the time, people tend to just lump it and say, oh, ODM has lost Bungoma, we do not have these quarters. Our numbers do not include those parts. So anybody, when we're coming to the negotiation table, we will not come and say we have Bungoma and someone will counter and say that we currently do not have Bungoma. We have not enjoyed that kind of support. We still have our bases in the coast. We still enjoy a great deal of support in Nairobi. We still enjoy a great support in Kisii area. Of course, there have been certain political changes in the past 6 months where certain leaders have emerged. For example, Matiang'i has emerged from Gusii Nation. But in all our bases, only Matiang'i has emerged. But if you look at him objectively, he's not carried a wave as, for example, you would say we Simba Arati in our regions carries. Like that sway, we're still not. It's something to be cautious about, but it's not something that would say that has greatly upset the kind of arithmetic we have from our bases.
And even with that, we can't run away from the camaraderie that there was between the Western Bloc and ODM under Raila Odinga. It was forever not just imagined, but was the reality that Raila Odinga ODM could count on Western. So without members of parliament, ODM, that there was the unassumed, unspoken agreement that the Western Bloc would always go with ODM. So can we now say that because it seems as though that support is swaying in a different direction, you can then now say, well, we don't have members of parliament, we don't have elected officials there, so it really doesn't matter. But Raila Odinga forever, under ODM, knew that support from the Western Bloc was something that he could count on.
Right. I think that is it's a good question. However, we have not lost anything, and I'm not trying to say that we have lost support from Malemba Nation. Specifically, the reason I keep on going back to these regions, for example, in 2022, the total population from the census, if you combine Bungoma and Trans Nzoia counties, the clusters in Bungoma and Trans Nzoia, the total population per the census in 2019 was 2.6 million. The number of registered voters was 1.045. William Ruto beat us in Bungoma and Trans Nzoia, getting 372,487 votes, while Raila got 277,000. So therefore, it is not a base that, for example, you would say that we got 100% of, and now suddenly we no longer enjoy that. Trans Nzoia and Bungoma regions actually favored the President Ruto over us. Yes. And therefore, one, that means that he enjoys support there, and we still have our bases that we had there. It could be the minority, but we still sort of enjoy that. However, be it as it may, if we have the wild assumption that we've lost that entire base, it does not translate into the fact that, for example, William Ruto has lost that entire base. So it's an area that, for example, as ODM, that's why I keep on saying that we didn't have the majority there. I'd be very concerned, for example, if we saw the wave had shifted in Kakamega, if we saw the wave had shifted in Busia. However, this is work that we're consistently doing. Even over the weekend, ODM was in Malava. We had a big rally there. So it's something that we just have to keep up with the dynamic nature of politics and keep ensuring that we gain ground where we've lost and consolidate the bases that we currently enjoy.
There ought to be concern then with regard to what it is we see, especially with the Linda Bonanchi movement that we see at the moment. And having a son from the region, from the soil, right, now being pushed to run for the highest office, then one would say that tends to rejig a people, whether it is from the basis that ODM has enjoyed before. You can't dismiss the fact that the son of the soil is being pushed by the region as a possible frontrunner in a presidential race. And with that in mind then, where ODM sits, just how better a strategy is there to ensure that it does not slip away? Because we'd say, fine, based off 2022, we enjoyed these bases, but it's 2026 and a lot has changed during that period, including a son of the soil who many then would say we resonate with him more because he is our son. How big of a concern then does that raise within the ODM circles?
I would think that the emergence of leaders is something that is actually very good. And I do not think that it should concern anybody that you've done such a stellar job that you're able to raise leaders who can come to the national fore. But in Sifuna's case, for example, he finds himself in the place where, in a path which I have the privilege of saying that even I have trodden. And we can't bank on the fact that, for example, you're able to draw crowds, because while politics might be about your visibility, now it's calculation. Elections are won by hard facts. You say that, for example, that a son of the soil has emerged and Sifuna has gone there, but we didn't see the MPs. We didn't see the members of parliament, because typically the elected members of parliament are the ones who they're the voice of the people. So if an MP takes this particular direction, typically it shows that this is what the people want. So if it gets to the point where you cannot even rally and marshal leaders from your region, where you have to, get people from the outside, and people make the argument that, because he left with the entirety of ODM. The members of parliament that have joined him from ODM are countable. I could count them. They're less than 10. You have Mheshimiwa Babu, Mheshimiwa Kibagendi, Mheshimiwa Onyonka. Who else? Quite literally, you would expect, even Satan, he fell with a third of the angels. And I'm sorry to use this analogy.
Wow.
For him to be the thing that he is, for him to be the force that we reckon with, he had to fall with a third of the angels in heaven. And the accusations that, the accusations that are leveled against the party, very consistent with the accusations that were leveled against God. But at the very least, you should be able to at least wipe a third of the angels. However, we have seen that you could pull a crowd in Kitengela. Anybody could pull a crowd in Kitengela. Anybody could pull a crowd in Thika. And anybody could pull... If you're just thinking about crowds, it's very easy. And the reason why we would be very confident in our numbers as ODM is, while people... First of all political crowds are mobilized using money.
ODM does that?
Yes.
Okay. ODM pays people to come to...
The rallies?
To the rallies?
I might be evasive in my answer because you've asked your question in like a very direct way.
As I should.
Yes, as you should, and I think very professional of you. However, all political gatherings are mobilized using money. A word to the wise. All of them. There are no organic crowds in politics. And I say this, there's no leader, regardless of who they are, who has not had some sort of incentivization for his people. All political leaders, politics runs on incentive. So for us, we know that these are the number of capes we had, these are the number of T-shirts we had. We can account for these numbers because we have a strong grassroots network. We are not relying, for example, as the Orange Democratic Movement, on a sporadic appearance. We know that if we have 100,000 people, if we have 13,000 people in a stadium, for example, we can account for them to the last man.
So what does it do then for your political psyche if you know that the people who have come for a rally have only come because they have been incentivized to do so?
I mean, incentive is of various, there's a wide array of incentives. It could be money, it could be whatever, but then it also could be the incentive, the ideology, because then after these people come, you get to sell your agenda.
So kind of like you draw them in order to then be able to sell the agenda.
It's just the art of seduction.
So, right. So then what happens in a case like we saw not too long ago when you incentivize these people to maybe vote for you and then they do not?
If you're speaking about Olkalao, I have a divergent view on UDA. I tend to think that Olkalao was not UDA's to lose because it wasn't theirs in the first place.
So why go in there with the way in which they did?
Because, and this is the argument that I was making earlier, the president has not shied from engaging in political contests because he's a political animal and he is unafraid of... He he is not limited to certain regions. He will not sit out an election just because it's not in a region where he enjoys support. You will remember that the departed leader of Al-Kalau was actually a Jubilee elected member of parliament. The united opposition purported that they had agreements, for example, in Bere, where they said if a party held a seat or enjoyed support, we will rally behind that particular candidate. And you saw that the Jubilee, for example, withdrew the candidature from Bere and left it for DP. In Al-Kalau, they were shortchanged. You would expect that if they truly were a united opposition, they would have thrown their weight behind the Jubilee candidate so that they all have equal strengths. But UDA went in there knowing that, this was not our seat. This is not a seat we would win. Because
do you know what it sounds like? It sounds to me like an athlete is training for the Olympics, and they know that their strength is in the 200 meters, but they spent their time jumping over a pole vault to say, well, I have nothing to lose in the 200-meter race, but let me just go jump the pole vault. Why would you do that?
But I think that one's just a bit off in the analogy, because I would say that people do not stop training for the 100 meters just because they know Usain Bolt is going to be on the track. They know that Bolt is the better athlete by all means. They know that this guy is probably going to win. He's the fastest man on earth, but I still show up for this 100-meter race. But they could be from like a different country that does not engage in sprints.
And the same athlete himself in the heats would not give everything in the heats. The same athlete who would come out and win the final because he knows that it's at the end that you give the final push. But it seems as though all of these resources were we're doing the same thing here. We're coming from the place where you talk about money being pushed into rallies. We're going to ask the question that where does this money come from in the first place? We'll do that in a bit. But you're putting all of these resources into something which you say I'm not really interested in. But let me put in public resources. Let me get people to go camp out there. Let me send people to go sit there and talk about how the government, who didn't pay attention to this place for the last I don't know how many years, but let's just go spend 2 weeks camping out here for something that I'm not really interested in gaining. It doesn't make sense.
No, fair.
And it's an indictment then on how you would spend resources to stick it to somebody else? Why would you do that?
No, certainly. I think you make a fair point, but I would piggyback off of a point that you've made, that nobody would expend all their energies if they knew. And I would ask a question: who tells you that was all their energy?
It was just some of it. So
I mean, it's just because it's impressive and it seems like it's sheerly intensive, it does not mean that that's all. Which that's neither here nor there. And that's not for me to answer. However, UDA also fielded a candidate in Al-Kalau in 2022, and they were beaten in 2022, to be fair. So probably they're just, I don't know. And the person actually who won the election was the UDA candidate in 2022. Yeah, so it's just that dynamic nature of politics. However, I still maintain that it was not theirs to lose.
I mean, at the end of the day, I know we're going for a break.
Yes.
We'll take a break, then we'll come back.
Let's take a break because Aseto has a question. Kasmuel McOure is with us this morning, and we're looking into the running mate question, but it's not just the running mate question, because that it has a lot to do then with party politics. And of course, the question comes in is that has ODM actually lost its potency around the country? We'll have a look into that when we come back from this quick break. Stay with us.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
About the arithmetic of the strongholds as we know them, because electoral bases can be perceived through the counties or through the tribal lens. In the Bukusu, for example, which now you would say Kalonzo Inukambani comes with about 1.5. Matiangi from Gusii Nation comes with about 900,000. The Bukusu Nation comes with about 554,000. So even if you wanted it alone, then if you think, for example, in the conversation that we are having, and Luo Nation is saying that we want, for example, Governor Gladys Wanga to be fronted for the DP, we know that we can marshal 1.7 to 2 million votes.
You don't need to decide now. I mean, is it a paranya?
No. That's what I'm saying.
It's just an example.
So, because personally, I belong to the faction that would say that we want Governor Wanga to be fronted for deputy presidency. We have not gotten to the point where that is a discussion that's happening in the party. You'll realize that the people from the coast, for example, said that they want Joho. And that's what I think, that's the dynamic nation, the living document aspect of politics, is that with all these, knowing our strengths and knowing our weaknesses, we come to the negotiation table. And I'll remind you of, for example, the 2002 election. Kibaki was not particularly the smartest candidate. He comes out of a tenure of being a member of parliament for 50 years. But when they went, we had Charity Ngilu from the SDP, like a very transformative thinker. If you heard Charity Ngilu's manifesto, you'd be like, this is the person we could. On the other hand, we had Kijana Wamalwa. On the other hand, but then now in the public, we know that we have all these presidential aspirants. Then we go to the closed door and we ask, okay, fine, we have all these good agendas. What are we bringing to the table? Kijana Wamalwa was sinking in debt. Charity Ngilu said, okay, I could raise about 300 mic from my husband and the friends. And Kibaki said, I have about 30 cars and I could raise about $1 billion and I could bring a few more billions. That's how he ends up becoming the presidential candidate. Not because he outclassed or he ideated his competitors. I think it's looking at Sifuna now, for example, I wouldn't be worried about his candidacy. I would say, for example, that he could be a paper tiger because, and I'm not saying this just to demean the person. He is a stellar orator and he's a great politician. But just as a presidential candidate, in 2024 July, Uhuru Park was full of young people who endorsed Okiya Mtata for presidency. It was a big rally. That was big. A few months later, then it was Maraga. Then a few months later, now it's Sifuna, for example. But then there was Babu as well before Sifuna. And if we're just going by a wave which we cannot quantify, I think it's a passing cloud. Heck, I even at some point was fronted
as a presidential
every time people look at me, they tell me, "Oh, you messed us up. You would have been the president of this country." And I say, "Oh yeah, would have."
But is ODM concerned then about its performance? And why am I talking about its performance? And its performance would come from the fact that you look at even why the Secretary General broke ranks with the party, and the broad-based government is based off the 10-point agenda, the agreement that ought to have been delivered within a certain time. And he has always had a problem with the implementation of that report as well, and that is why he walked out. Now, as we go to 2027, does ODM carry the baggage of the UDA government? Because I'm not calling it the broad-based government. Does ODM carry the baggage of UDA government? And what then does that do not only to Wananchi in your bases, but Wananchi across the country, including Mount Kenya that gave Raila Odinga a million votes?
So most definitely, Aseto, ODM will carry baggage of the UDA government in 2027. We cannot run away from that. That if the people will be campaigning against the government, they will lump us together. But I do not think that it is necessarily a bad thing to be lumped together, because in our support bases, we've seen radical changes in road, air networks. We've seen radical changes in food security, especially in Homa Bay. So a lot of the transformation of the rice plantations
but
and
Kasmuel,
reclamations.
Things you talk about are things that ought to be given to any Kenyan, not because apparently you joined government, right?
Certainly. However, these things have not been given to these regions. And that's why I'm saying that it is not going to be a bad thing. Because post-independence, we've not had a president who's invested that greatly in the penetration of road networks or development, despite the fact that we've had governments. Nobody has invested in the north as this president has. So, and that's why it would be like, if you would beat us in this, in a particular area, we would just look at, the people are content with the track record. Because remember, ODM has consistently been a party of the opposition. You would expect that all its members, all our members would be uncomfortable that we joined government. But we have almost all our bases agreeing that, we ought to give the president a second term. And if, for example, we're going to a presidential election, I was listening to Mheshimiwa Sifuna yesterday. You have the popularity, but I've not seen the solid ideas of governance, for example. If you ask about an economic agenda, and he says that he will ask the experts, at the very least, we should be able to see this is what, because, for example, President Ruto, he had the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. We knew that Baba was more of a welfarist. What, for example, economic policy are we seeing? He seems to be more focused on, for example, human rights, which is a great thing. But that's also what we are focused on, because we have been very heavy on the compensation. And I've been saying this, that especially the Luo faction of ODM, it knows what to. It seems as though the perception I'm seeing is the only valuable Luo body is a dead one, in the sense that we become heroes after our death. That's why everybody wants to invoke Tom Mboya, for example. But when he was alive, Oko and Baba most recently, because he was a statesman, and we keep on saying that he did a great thing, a bad, horrible thing to leave us. But when he asked us for the vote, we couldn't give it to him. And even in the reason I'm extrapolating this is, people like William Ruto, they invoke their heroes. He wants to be called Koitalel Arab Samoei, so he stops calling himself Kipchirchir, he calls himself Samoei, invoking his ancestors. Gachagua, consistently talking about Mau Mau. You would expect someone like Sifuna saying that I am awakening the spirit of Kijana wa Malwa. I'm okay, but everybody now wants to.
Why though?
I just think the cultural totems, we must, at the very least, not have to suffer the erasure of thinking that. I can't say that I'm Malcolm X, or I can't say that I'm Winston Churchill.
You can say that you're Kasmuel. Edwin Sifuna can say, I am Edwin Sifuna.
Yes,
as he has said.
But none of the things that we feel are being forced, and this is why I'm having it in an ODM context, is they're saying that this is the invocation of Baba's spirit. But I keep on saying that Baba walked with very many generals who have stayed in one camp. It is unfair that, say, because somebody is speaking a different tune, that then is the spirit of Baba. However, if you're to think about it, these are people who, if they were very convicted in their ways, they would have done the honorable thing, which I've said repeatedly, which is resign from the party and seek a fresh mandate. They have the popularity. We have the time and the resources and the systems in place. Baba did this under very, very difficult circumstances where he had faced arrest, but he still resigned when he said, I disagree with Ford, I disagree with Kanu, I am resigning and going to seek a fresh mandate. None of these politicians are willing to do that. And that's why I keep on saying that they are paper tigers, because if you truly are, if you truly believe in that and you're convicted in your ways, you should have done things procedurally.
So what happens? I mean, because what you can do is that you can speculate.
Yeah.
What happens in the event that this is not just, burning paper in the wind?
And the eventuality is?
And the popularity is not just at face value, but that it is true, and that Kenyans are looking for something different.
And if
in
this,
Sifuna,
for example, will this deliver better governance and better service delivery to the people?
No, what happens to the position that ODM, for example, takes right now, where it's seen that, perhaps this popularity has waned and on this side, but that it has grown on the other?
I'm not here to contest Sifuna's popularity. I actually say that he is actually quite popular, but it does not faze us. Popularity doesn't phase us. So
what you're saying is that it doesn't phase ODM.
It doesn't phase us, because we've seen popular candidates before. We've seen Peter Kenneth, who made social media ungovernable in his time. He got 79,000 votes at the presidential level. It's popularity hasn't. I don't think it's a thing that would phase us. Or the ODM is committed to a meticulous, and it's drudging, very mechanical but very, very meticulous sense of structure to the grassroots level. So these meetings that a lot of people are taking for granted, you see that the party leader, for example, yesterday met leaders from Baringo, they met leaders from that grassroots network is watered and kept alive every single day. So for us, it's not about who's popular and who's not, it's just about consolidating the gains that we've amassed and trying to see if we can gain new ground.
Very many candidates many names have been propped up for those who then want to become the deputy president, who want to be William Ruto's running mate. And with that, then we just have to go back to 2022, how that happened under UDA. There were interviews, and then President Ruto settled for Rigathi Gachagua. Now, with the Oparanya being mentioned, we have Ajoho being mentioned, and many other, including Governor Wanga. And there are as well Kithure Kindiki. What process then is ODM willing to be subjected to? Because then ODM is not coming in, it is coming in as a party. It is not coming in as UDA, because remember, that is a process that took place within UDA itself. In this case, how is ODM willing to go around it with others, including those within UDA? Will they also go through interviews, or they will come with a candidate? This is the person who settled down for.
I mean, it's the reason why we might walk around with a bit of braggadocio is because we know we in comparison to our partners, and not to look down on anybody, in relation to our partners, we have a force majeure in terms of numbers, and the whole purpose of the upcoming negotiations is that now we will say that, yeah, however, you might want to settle on this, but this would be the ramifications. When it just comes to real politics, we'll sit down and we'll say, this is what we bring. Then everybody will say, this is what I bring, this is what you bring, this is what you bring as a candidate. And then we will see the way forward. Mm-hmm. I don't think that this is something that we will disagree on. However, the reason why we have this much confidence is that we enjoy quite a bit of support, and in comparison to other parties, even within the opposition, they have not become as large as we are. They've not built the structures as we are, and that's why we're comfortable to make these demands. So we are saying, yeah, we're giving you the presidency, but we want the deputy presidency. Yeah. So it may be down the road, Kindiki might join ODM. We don't know. I mean, it's politics.
You did mention that then ODM has recognized the possibility of having to go the thing alone. What does that mean? Is it a breakup, or is it the breakup completely, or the breakup where you still see your ex on Saturday? What are we talking about
I
here?
don't think it's a breakup. It's just... I would say it's just liberty. It's you posting something on your status. The relationship is still very stable, but every once in a while I'll post a dark joke, and my girlfriend will be like, "Hey, babe, what's that about?" But if the reason I was bringing that up is, in the past, that's what we had said. But right now, I think it's fully settled that we are in a committed partnership with President Ruto, and we will work with him to the very end in 2027. And it's not because we're saving a sinking ship or whatever. There are tangible results. There are some reforms and radical improvements that we've seen come from this administration. It suffers its faults greatly. There are areas which could be done better, and I've seen improvements, especially in things to do with human rights. However, it's constant improvement. If you think about the reason why I was talking about an agenda, is if you take something like housing, we've been joking with my friends that the Linda Kuku movement is against the building of affordable housing, but the only reservation I would see people have towards affordable housing, if it's in comparison to Singapore, for example, is that in Singapore it gave ownership to a lot of people,
right,
and it didn't affect the take-home pay as greatly or as severely. And then, of course, in the Singaporean process, you own their houses on a 99-year lease. So those are some of the things that I would fine-tune, because I see the reservation that Kenyans have is they're saying, okay, fine, we have a new health system, but is it worth paying 10 billion for every year? Because people think it's 104 billion being paid. And I think that these are some of the things that need to be fine-tuned here. And then, because generally the concept is good, but people are asking, is it worth the money? So we have to, ease and walk with people through policy and onboard them, ensure that you reduce the resistance. If you look at, for example, the two previous finance bills, the bill of 26 and 25, there has been a deliberate effort to ease and to the point where the minister is going to the Bunge la Mwananchi and whatnot to ensure that as much as you can, you try and, carry people in policy. Yeah.
And I think with that, one asks the question then, with a broad-based arrangement coming in place, which was then to address the concerns of the young people at the time, then comes the 10-point agenda. One asks the question, from where it is you sit, having also been at the forefront during that time, have these things, the 10-point agenda, been fulfilled? And how then does that affect ODM, UDA in 2027? Because at the end of the day, that equally will matter.
Certainly. I think the broad-based, the memorandum of understanding is being satisfied to a great degree, because part of what we had said was ensuring that there's the protection of Article 37 of the Constitution, which involves our right to freedom of assembly, demonstration, picketing, and ensuring that there are no police violations around that. Has this gone as, can we say that this is at 100% implementation? Certainly not. We're still in a country where we see certain irregularities within the force that I cannot run away from, but they are not as gross. We've seen the point where the president owns up and says that never again will I. We've seen processes, for example, the compensation of victims starting from 2013. We've seen, because part of it also included tax and taxation, we've seen a very sober finance bill, come this year. We've seen, of course, things like unemployment, which was supposed to be there, and the meaningful inclusion of youth in public life. Those are things which, of course, have to come with time. It's not a document that can be fulfilled, for example, in 3 months. It's not a document that can be fulfilled in a year. But we are not where we used to be when that memorandum of understanding was signed. People might prefer a different approach. However, we cannot say that nothing has been done. That's from where I sit. That's what I see. Yeah.
All a situation to watch. The politics are hotting up, and it will be very interesting to see how things develop. I mean, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. ODM News leader Kasmuel McOure has been here with us this morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you as well, Ndu and Asato.
Asante. Good morning, 8 a.m.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.